But first, Eric Kauffman, Professor of Woke Origins, University of Buckingham. I think you had a hand in this research as well, Eric. I hope that doesn't underplay your role. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Ian. Yes, no, it was research done by Matt Goodwin at our center. And yeah, so it makes the point really, as you said, that we're going to see dramatic ethnic shifts in Britain with the white British historic ethnic majority, which was as close to 90% around the year 2000, falling below the 50% mark around 2063. So that's a very historic shift in the ethnic composition of Britain.
Many will say, well, look, you know, it's the 21st century. People move around. Years ago, they thought that, you know, a trip to Doncaster was controversial. Now, a trip to anywhere is doable. People move around with work, with jobs, travel, a smaller world, the internet. Everything is kind of slightly more sort of focused on that now. And at this point in the 21st century, we were never, every nation around the globe was never going to retain their, if you like, their original kind of origins or ethnicity. It was always going to get mixed up a bit.
Yeah, I think there's certainly an impact of greater global connectedness. It's worth saying, however, that it is only really the Western nations, North America, Western Europe, that have undergone this transformation. And so it's only because they've opened themselves up to substantial non-traditional immigration flows that they have undergone this ethnic change. You know, and this is not hypothetical. Demography is the most predictive of the social sciences. We can look at the under 5 population. And so this is not like an economic forecast. This is very, very likely.
This is actually happening, right?
Yeah,
in real time.
London, London went from about 87% white British in 1971 to 37% today. So these changes, I think we can expect to happen. They will be affected by the rate of immigration, however. But yes, and I think a country has a right to determine the rate of change that it wants to accept.
100%. And a country shouldn't also apologise, I would have thought, reasonable, that for wanting to retain its sort of indigenous identity, if that's the way to put it.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that people make a mistake when they, you know, so if we take two statements, you know, do you have to be white to be British? No. If Britain becomes majority non-white or majority Muslim, is it less British than it was before? Yes. Those two statements are not a contradiction, actually. And people often conflate those two statements. It's also worth saying ethnic minorities do not want to see this change either. In fact, a lot of surveys which suggest they're attached to a historical ethnic composition as well as white people. So they're not in favor of this either. The other thing is to say is that the effects of this have been studied by social scientists. The greater diversity you see is associated with lower trust in your fellow citizens at a local level across the majority of studies. On average, this is so likelihood of returning a wallet, for example, it declines in a more diverse neighborhood compared to a less diverse one. Attachment to neighborhood drops as the neighborhood becomes more diverse. So there are a whole series of social effects that lead to lower trust, and that has to be factored in, I think, to these discussions.
And I guess there's also some sort of irredeemable realities here as well, Eric. Fertility rates are low. Do we have ourselves to blame for this?
Oh, no, absolutely. I mean, you know, there's no question that fertility is probably the main driver, the drop. And that's dropped a lot in Britain toward around 1.5 on average per couple. But countries have a choice. You know, Japan and East Asia chose to, okay, we're going to try and use older people. We're going to try and mechanize. We're not going to go for a large immigration strategy to keep growing the population. Countries of the West, North America, Australia, Western Europe have gone to try and maintain or increase their populations, even in the face of low fertility. And I think that's the trade-off. I do think that British people would rather, most British people would rather actually say, we're going to slow down population growth until we can get our fertility back up, rather than saying we're going to keep growing.
But you're never going to get a government, and Keir Starmer likes to give a press conference, of course, and you know I sometimes wonder when prime ministers of whatever hue or sway want to sort of showcase their personal kind of thing rather than something bigger. But he would never talk about this. He would never stand up and say, look, you know, we've just been come into possession of some research that says that white Brits are going to become a minority. We need to do something about it. You'd never hear him say that, and I don't imagine you'd hear many leaders say that.
Well, no, because there's a squeamishness, and I would say this extends even to people like Jacob Rees-Mogg and Nigel Farage. They don't really know how to talk about ethnic change. They're happy to talk about we need integration and the impact on employment and public services, but there's a real squeamishness because they don't want to be accused of being a racist. I mean, this all gets back to the expansion and inflation of the term racist. As I said, saying that a country's ethnic composition is an important part of its identity is not the same thing as saying you have to be white to be British. Yeah. And they're not able to make that distinction, and therefore the conversation is just dumb and it's repressed. But it needs to be talked about because these are real effects that have been measured by social science and are going to have an impact on trust and solidarity.
Yeah, trust, solidarity, the whole neighbourly thing, social cohesion, etc. Listen, Eric, great to have you on. Let's speak again because this is really interesting territory. Eric Kauffman, Professor of Woke Origins, University of Buckingham. James Matthewson is with us, former Labour spokesman. James, good afternoon to you. Nice to have you with us again. I'm going to take a guess here. You didn't study woke origins at the University of Buckingham, but it's just possible you have a view on where we are at. You're a white Brit, as far as I know. I don't know about your parental lineage, but nonetheless, you could become a minority in 40 years. What are your thoughts on that?
I am a white Brit. Ian, I don't know how you guessed it, but I didn't study woke origins. You're absolutely right.
You're full of surprise. You're always full of surprises when you come on here.
What can I say? You know, I don't think most of us did we? But here's the thing. Look, I mean, Eric Kauffman as well, who you've just had on, it's important to recognise is a conservative and did express support for Ron DeSantis in America. You know, he's pretty right-wing when it comes to professors, especially people in university who are traditionally not right-wing. He's pretty right-wing when it comes to professors and their worldview. I disagree with them. You won't be surprised to know. And the reason why is because I'm very concerned about this narrative that is building at the moment. It's building in certain parts of our media. It's building in certain parts of our political discourse. And it's one of ethnic nationalism. And we heard it from Eric there just a moment ago. He said, you know, you don't have to be white to be British. OK, that's great. That's an established fact. But Britain would be less British if it wasn't white. Those two things can't be true at the same time. That's an oxymoron. It makes absolutely no sense. To me...
But it's a fair point, though, isn't it? If you went to India and didn't see any Indians, I'd be devastated. I wouldn't think I'd been to India.
But the problem here is a complete lack of understanding of history and how the world works. What do we think we are when we talk about how we're British? What do we think we are? Because if you go around these islands and you ask people about their identity, they will give you a million different answers. They will tell you they're English, they'll tell you they're Scottish, they'll tell you they're Northumbrian, as I am. They'll tell you they're from Ireland, they'll tell you they're Irish if they're in Northern Ireland. You know, this is a complex mix of cultures that we have in our United Kingdom, which is why it's a United Kingdom. But none of it is to do with skin colour. And this obsession, Ian, it's very, very concerning, very dangerous. It harps back to the likes of Enoch Powell's speech, you know, about rivers of blood, about the black man having the whip.
Is it really that, though, James? Is it not just a case of, you know, I said at the beginning, you probably wouldn't have heard this, but if you were sitting at home as a proud lefty, and there's nothing wrong with that, it's a democracy, and you were watching a documentary on BBC4 about the subjugated people of Chimbote, a city in Peru, who were being taken over and their culture was being eradicated, you'd probably be starting a crowdfunder for them, thinking this is terrible. You know, these people need to retain their identity. And I can see by that cheeky smile on your face, you know I'm right.
No, I don't know.
Come on, you would be, James.
I disagree.
You'd be dipping into your pocket. These people have a culture. These people have a way of life. Let them keep it. Don't interrupt it.
What people?
The people I was just referring to, the fictitious documentary.
But when we're talking about non-white people, what are we talking about?
Well, if you were talking about an ethnic race where you felt that the story of their culture was being eradicated
Well,
or
white people
diluted,
aren't a culture,
then
Ian.
you would be the first to be standing up going, do you know what? It's only reasonable that a proud group of people want to retain their lineage.
Exactly the same as I support Irish people defending their language. Exactly the same as I support Scottish people up here in Edinburgh, where I am, supporting Gaelic as a language, because that's been eroded and their culture's been eroded by English opposition for many years. They're the same things that I support. They're white cultures, their skin colour's white, they're a pale complexion. The problem here is, Ian, we're grouping white people as a race and trying to think of them as some kind of culture of their own. It simply is not true. White people are not a culture, they are not a race, and they are not being eroded, we're not being invaded, and the language that's being used is one of a deliberate strategy.
Well, they are being diminished.
Let me finish a second, because the deliberate strategy is one of the great replacement theory, and some of you viewers might not have heard of this, but they should Google it, because it is a deliberate effort by the far right and by right-wing governments around the world to try and scare people into the idea that they're...
Agreed. And I understand that conspiracy theory. I see it come up on my timeline time and time again. This is all deliberate, and Klaus Schwab and goodness knows who else are orchestrating it. I don't buy into that, but there is nonetheless, whatever way or reason we have got here, low fertility rates, more immigration, certain religious faiths having greater idea of a family expansion. That's not a criticism, that's just a reality. If you take Islam or take Muslims, that group is procreating at a greater rate, and the British are way behind. So we could blame Brits.
Not the British, no. Not the British.
Or the white British.
Because my Muslim friends are British. My black friends are British. Because they were born here and they're British.
Okay.
That's not what makes them British.
No, but you're not able to see a distinction there, are you?
I am able to see a distinction between people who are British and not British. Do you hold a British passport? Do you hold a UK passport?
I hold a British passport, yeah.
Yeah, you're British. Great, congratulations. So is anybody else who holds one.
Is that it? Is that it? That's all that defines your Britishness, a passport?
That's how nationality works.
Come on, James, you know that's not true. Would you really tell one of your many Muslim friends that your only cultural identity is via their passport? They would say, no, I'm much more than that. I am much more than that.
We're talking, three different things here. Yeah. Nationality, culture, and skin colour. Three completely separate things. You can interchange all three.
There's a Venn diagram there, though.
Yeah, but you could interchange all three of them, okay? And still be, you can be a British Muslim with dark skin who lives here in the UK and is culturally British, all right? What do we mean by culturally British? It's interesting, isn't it? It's an interesting debate to have.
Okay. Do you not see that there is a cultural component to Islam, for example, that isn't applicable to non-Muslims?
No, because I see arguments all the time. Because if you actually
you don't see that.
Talk to people...
Do you ever go out, James?
Of course I do. And I talk to more people of ethnic disposition than you do, by the sounds of it.
Probably not.
When you talk to these people, you see that there are debates within those communities. My pals who are of Southeast Asian origin, who are Muslim, are all having debates with each other all the time about, cultural issues and differences in opinion, depending on the way they were raised. It's all different. There are nuances. But this idea that we just simplify it and say there's a great invasion underway and that there'll be less white faces. Why would it be a problem, in theory, that there would be less white faces in Britain if Britain's cultural impact remains the same?
Well, if you were to ask that question to a group of students in a lecture hall, why are there fewer white faces around, then at some point very soon in that debate, someone's going to simply say, objectively, they're going to say, well, that's because there aren't as many of them, and other races, other groups have procreated faster. There's been more immigration. It could be they would be the kind of answers that people would give you, and they'd be reasonable answers. You're saying it doesn't matter.
Oh, because procreation's a choice. What, we're going to start mandating white families to breed?
Well, correct, yes. I mean, we've made today International or National Procreation Wednesday here on the programme.
Wonderful. I'll not be partaking.
Well, you don't have to, James. It is optional, and maybe it's something you prefer to do solo. I don't know. But nonetheless, the issue I was trying to raise is that we've had 217 conceptions since we came on air. So
wow. Well, but I mean, you've got to be careful, Ian, because Talk TV's numbers might continue to go down if everyone's off procreating while they're meant to be watching you. But don't do it during your segment, I would say.
Well, you never know. Yeah, I think the phrase you were looking for was up rather than down. But let's not get into that. Listen, James, as always, it's always a bit of a challenge, but it's fun and relatively easy. James Matthewson, thank you, former Labour spokesman with us on the programme.